What would you do if, in your search for connection, you uncovered a truth so profound it shattered everything you believed to be real? In the heart of an opulent mansion, where the echoes of laughter once wove through gilded halls, Dominic Langley found himself imprisoned in a solitude that grew heavier with each passing day. The sprawling estate, once a symbol of his immense wealth and influence, now felt more like a golden cage, trapping him in a life that no longer held meaning. Outside, the city thrived, teeming with life, love, and laughter. Yet he remained an island unto himself, untouched by the vibrancy beyond his gates. Haunted by the memory of his late wife Dominic, a billionaire who had once basked in the company of the elite was now adrift in an ocean of grief. His pain did not stem solely from her absence, but from the bitter realization that despite all he possessed, he had never felt more alone. The grandeur of his mansion, adorned with the finest furnishings and priceless art, only deepened the hollow ache within him. Each chandelier, every carefully curated masterpiece stood as a haunting testament to the life they had built together, a life now reduced to nothing more than lingering shadows and memories. He longed for companionship, for someone to share his burdens and ease the unbearable silence. But his wealth, once a gateway to admiration, had become an insurmountable barrier, isolating him from genuine human connection. And yet, amidst the loneliness, there was Lilia, his steadfast housekeeper, a woman of quiet strength and unspoken grace. For years, she had been a constant presence, tending to the mansion with unwavering devotion, her existence interwoven with his in ways neither of them had fully acknowledged. Lilia was a stark contrast to the world of excess that surrounded her. With her simple attire and unassuming demeanor, she was a woman shaped by struggle, a survivor of hardship who had fought relentlessly for a better future. The difficulties of her past had forged within her a quiet resilience, an inner strength that went unnoticed by many, but was impossible to ignore by those who truly saw her. Each day spent within the walls of Dominic's estate was a step closer to something greater, an opportunity for stability, a life that promised more than mere endurance. The mansion, with all its magnificence, was both a sanctuary and a prison. Dominic's wealth had once drawn admirers in droves, yet when the grandeur of his parties faded, so too did the people who had once clamored for his attention. What remained was an eerie silence, stretching endlessly through empty corridors, reminding him that affluence did not equate to belonging. And so, in the midst of his desolation, Dominic made an unexpected decision, one born not of passion, but of desperation. He would marry Lilia, not out of love, but in an attempt to fill the void that threatened to consume him. Their union would be pragmatic, a contract rather than a romance, a solution to loneliness rather than a promise of devotion. When Dominic proposed, Lilia's reaction was far from what he had anticipated. "Marry you?" she echoed, disbelief flickering in her eyes. Dominic exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Not for love, I know." His voice was edged with frustration. "But we've known each other for years. You are the only constant in my life." Lilia's expression remained unreadable as she took a step back, arms crossing over her chest. "That doesn't mean we should get married, Dominic." Her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable sadness in her tone. "You want someone by your side, but have you considered what I want? I refuse to be a shadow in the life of a man still mourning another woman." Dominic's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about it that way. For the first time, he realized perhaps he wasn't the only one living in the shadow of the past. As the day of their wedding drew near, a fragile hope flickered in Dominic's heart. Perhaps, with Lilia by his side, he could reclaim even the faintest semblance of happiness, a life not defined by loss, but by the possibility of something new. Yet on the night of their wedding, as he stepped into the dimly lit room, everything shifted. The air felt thick with anticipation, an almost tangible force pressing against him. And then he saw her. Lilia stood before him, her silhouette bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. There was a quiet elegance to her, an unspoken strength woven into every delicate movement. But it was not just her presence that sent a shiver down his spine. It was her eyes. There, beyond the surface of warmth and resilience, lay something unexpected. A flicker of something deeper, a truth that had lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And in that instant, Dominic knew Lilia was more than the woman who had dutifully maintained the walls of his gilded prison. She was a survivor of untold struggles, a keeper of her own hidden battles. The realization struck him like a lightning bolt, unraveling the carefully constructed narrative he had built around her. She was not just a housekeeper. She was a woman with a past, a woman who had lived, fought, and endured. And now that past stood between them, an invisible force threatening to shake the fragile foundation of their union. The weight of their histories, the choices they had made, the secrets they harbored, they would all converge in an inevitable storm. This marriage, conceived in solitude and desperation, would become a crucible, forcing them to confront not only each other, but the vulnerabilities they had spent years avoiding. For Dominic, it meant facing the ghost of a love lost, the relentless grip of grief that had kept his heart locked away. It meant questioning whether he was truly capable of moving forward, or if he had merely sought to fill an empty space in his life. For Lilia, it was a reckoning of her own, one that stretched beyond the walls of this mansion, beyond the confines of Dominic's world. She had fought against the weight of societal expectation, had dared to dream of something more than mere survival. But was this marriage her salvation, or merely another cage, disguised in finer trappings? As the moon cast its silvery glow over the estate, illuminating the hidden corners where sorrow and hope intertwined, Dominic and Lilia stood at the precipice of something unknown. Would they be consumed by the weight of their pasts, or could they forge a new beginning amidst the ruins? With hearts pounding and the specter of uncertainty looming, they found themselves facing the ultimate question. Could love truly take root in the most unexpected of places, or was it destined to wither beneath the burden of what had come before? The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the promise of transformation but shadowed by the fears they had yet to name. As Dominic looked at Lilia, an unfamiliar emotion surged through him. He had entered this marriage seeking solace, a reprieve from loneliness, but the way she looked at him, the way she stood, unwavering, ignited something long buried within him. Hope. Yet, with that hope came doubt. Was this real, or was he simply projecting his need for companionship onto a woman who had her own dreams, her own desires? Could he see her for who she truly was, or would he only ever see her through the distorted lens of his solitude? In the days following their wedding, a delicate peace settled over the mansion. Dominic moved cautiously through this unfamiliar chapter, trying to embrace the possibility of something more. But the past lingered like a specter in the shadows, whispering its presence in every quiet moment. The question remained, would they find a way forward, or would the weight of what once was crush them before they even began? Dominic found himself drawn to Lilia in ways he hadn't anticipated. He wanted to understand her, to unravel the quiet mystery of the woman who now shared his name. Yet every attempt to bridge the distance between them felt like stepping onto fragile ground, where one wrong move could shatter whatever delicate connection they were building. He caught glimpses of her strength, the quiet resilience in her posture, the unwavering determination in her eyes. But just when he thought they were beginning to understand each other, an invisible force pulled them apart, as if something unspoken always lingered between them. And then there was Alexander, charismatic, persuasive, and ever the master of disruption. Alexander had begun to visit more frequently, his presence a reminder of the world Dominic was trying to leave behind. He arrived with grand ideas, unsolicited advice, and a steady insistence that Dominic return to the life he had once embraced so easily. One night, Alexander brought something more than words. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed a sealed envelope onto the table in front of Dominic, leaning back with an air of quiet amusement. "You trust her that much?" His voice was laced with something unsettling, curiosity, challenge, maybe even pity. Dominic's brow furrowed. "What are you getting at?" Alexander merely gestured toward the envelope. "Read this." A strange weight settled in Dominic's chest as he reached for it, fingers hesitant as he broke the seal. Inside were copies of letters, applications, correspondence addressed to a university far from here. His stomach twisted. "Why?" The question slipped from his lips before he could stop it. "She never told you?" Alexander's smirk deepened. Dominic barely heard him. His gaze remained locked on the pages, the words blurring together. "She's waiting for the right moment to leave," Alexander continued smoothly, as if savoring every syllable. "Did you really think she wanted this life forever? She never wanted to be your wife, Dominic. She wants to be free." Dominic closed his eyes. A lie. It had to be a lie. And yet, why had she never told him? The weight of Alexander's words lingered long after he left. That night, as Dominic and Lilia sat across from each other in the dimly lit dining room, he found himself watching her differently, searching for something he had never questioned before. A sign, a crack in the facade, a trace of deception where none had ever existed before. His voice came quieter than he intended. "Did you ever think about leaving?" Lilia blinked, caught off guard. Slowly, she set down her fork. "What do you mean?" Dominic hesitated, but doubt gnawed at him, relentless and unshakable. "Alexander showed me something." He exhaled sharply, pushing the words out. "Letters. Applications to a university far from here. Were you ever going to tell me?" A shadow passed over her face, dark and fleeting. Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was afraid, Dominic. Afraid that if I told you, you'd see it as betrayal." His chest tightened. So it was true? She had kept it from him? And now, the question remained, was it because she had never trusted him, or because she had never intended to stay? "I needed to know that I had a choice," Lilia continued, her voice unsteady but resolute. "I never meant to deceive you, but I didn't want to become someone who merely existed in your life." Her words landed like a blow, striking at something deep within Dominic. He swallowed hard, caught between the sting of betrayal and the weight of his own guilt. Had he ever truly asked what she wanted? Had he ever considered her desires beyond the confines of this marriage he had orchestrated? Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Dominic, my old friend." Alexander's arrival was as grand as ever, his arms outstretched in mock camaraderie as he pulled Dominic into a firm embrace. His voice brimmed with amusement, the edges of his grin sharp with something unsaid. "I've been hearing whispers about your latest venture," Alexander drawled. "A bold move, marrying your housekeeper. I must say, you've always had a flair for the dramatic." Heat crawled up Dominic's neck. "It's not what you think, Alexander. This is different." Alexander tilted his head, his smirk deepening. "Different or desperate?" His laughter rang through the grand hall, bouncing off marble and crystal like a taunt. "You've always been a romantic, Dominic, but marrying for companionship? How quaint." Lilia stood quietly in the background, her presence suddenly feeling precarious, like an uninvited guest in her own home. Dominic could feel the weight of her silence, the way his decisions, however noble in his mind, were now being dissected by those who had never cared to understand them. Alexander, as always, filled the room with his stories, tales of past exploits, grand ambitions, and visions of the future. But Dominic felt the weight of something else pressing down on him. Judgment, expectation, the constant tug between the man he had been and the man he was struggling to become. Days turned into weeks, and Dominic found himself at a crossroads, torn between Alexander's relentless ambition and Lilia's quiet resilience. The mansion, once a refuge, had begun to feel like a battleground. Alexander's visits grew more frequent, each time accompanied by yet another elaborate scheme, another proposition designed to pull Dominic back into the world he had spent years cultivating. One evening, in the dim glow of the opulent library, Alexander leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of brandy between his fingers. "Why not host a grand gala?" he suggested smoothly. "You're a Langley. It's time you remind the world who you are. Show them you're not just some man in mourning. You're still a force to be reckoned with." Dominic hesitated. The very idea filled him with unease, yet he felt the pressure mounting. From Alexander, from the expectations that clung to his name, from the ever-growing need to prove that he was still relevant in the eyes of the world. "And what of Lilia?" Dominic asked suddenly. "What place does she have in this grand vision of yours?" Alexander waved a dismissive hand as if the question itself was absurd. "She's a housekeeper, Dominic. She doesn't belong in our world. You need to project the right image, not muddle it with in." The word came out sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Even Dominic was startled by the force behind it. A quiet rage stirred inside him, one he hadn't anticipated. "Lilia is my wife. She is part of my life now, whether you like it or not." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The easy charm in Alexander's eyes faded, replaced by something colder. For the first time in a long while, Dominic saw the man behind the smirk. Alexander's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Dominic," he said, his voice devoid of its usual playfulness. "Don't let your grief cloud your judgment." But Dominic wasn't sure his judgment had ever been clearer. Dominic stood his ground, his pulse hammering in his chest. He was at a crossroads, and for the first time in his life, the choice before him felt impossibly personal. The conversation with Alexander had ignited something within him, a fire that tested his resolve and forced him to confront his deepest fears. Would he allow his past to dictate his future, or could he embrace the uncertainty of this new life with Lilia by his side? From the shadows of the room, Lilia watched the exchange unfold, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. She had grown fond of Dominic, perhaps more than she had ever intended, but the shifting dynamics of the mansion unsettled her. Alexander's presence was a reminder of a world she had never belonged to, one that made her feel small, insignificant. For so long she had thought of the mansion as a sanctuary, a cocoon of security. Now, it felt like a gilded trap. It was in the quiet embrace of the garden, where roses bloomed under the glow of lantern light and the scent of jasmine perfumed the night air, that she finally confronted him. "You don't have to prove anything to him," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Your worth isn't defined by wealth or status, Dominic. It's found in kindness, in the moments we share, in the choices you make for yourself, not for others." Dominic turned to her, the fog of doubt in his mind lifting ever so slightly as he met her gaze. "I thought marrying you would heal the wounds of my past," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I fear I may be dragging you down with me." Lilia took a step closer, her presence a quiet force of resilience. "I chose to stand by you, Dominic, but you must also choose to stand for yourself. If you live your life dictated by the expectations of others, you will never be free. We can build something meaningful together, but only if we do it with honesty and courage." Her words cut through him like a blade, sharp and undeniable. And yet, even as he felt the stirrings of clarity, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. Their relationship was built on uncertain ground, and the ghosts of their past still lingered in the shadows. He wanted to believe they could carve out something real, something lasting. But just as he began to embrace that fragile hope, another truth emerged. One that shook the very foundation of what they had begun to build. Dominic discovered that Lilia had been keeping something from him. Dreams of a life beyond the mansion, letters to universities, applications filled with the quiet yearning for a future she had never spoken of. The realization struck him like a cold blade to the gut. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice carried a weight of frustration laced with something deeper, a sting of betrayal he hadn't expected to feel. "I thought we were in this together." Lilia's expression hardened, her shoulders squared as if bracing for a storm she had always known would come. "You never asked." Her voice was steady, but beneath it was an ache that had long gone unnoticed. "You were too consumed by your own grief to notice my silence. You wanted me to fill the void left by your wife, but you never stopped to ask what I wanted." Dominic opened his mouth, but no words came. "I care for you, Dominic," she continued, her voice softer now but no less firm. "But I cannot be the person you need me to be if it means losing myself in the process." And just like that, the truth stood between them. Unavoidable, undeniable. This marriage had been built as an escape, a solution to loneliness. But in trying to save himself, had he unwittingly trapped her? Dominic had spent so long drowning in his grief that he had never stopped to see the woman standing before him, not as an answer to his sorrow, but as a person with dreams, fears, and a life of her own. Now the question loomed over them, unspoken yet deafening: could they truly build something together, or had they been doomed from the start? The confrontation had shaken Dominic to his core. He had been so consumed by his own pain, so blinded by the weight of his grief, that he had failed to see Lilia's struggles standing right before him. The realization struck with the force of a tidal wave. If they were to forge something real, something lasting, they would have to confront their vulnerabilities together. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with emotional upheaval, external pressures, and the haunting specters of their pasts. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the sprawling mansion, Dominic felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. He did not know what the future held, but for the first time he was willing to face it head-on, with Lilia as partners in a delicate dance of redemption and discovery. As days melted into weeks, the fragile peace within the mansion began to fray beneath the weight of unspoken tensions. The walls that had once housed only solitude now echoed with the strain of expectations, both from within and without. Dominic felt the ground shifting beneath him as new challenges arose, each more daunting than the last. Lilia's ambitions, her quiet yet undeniable yearning for independence, stirred a storm of emotions within him: confusion, guilt, a fear he had never admitted to himself, the fear of inadequacy. He had entered this marriage believing she would be his solace, his anchor, but instead she had forced him to confront truths he had long ignored. And then there was Alexander, ever persuasive, ever relentless. The idea of hosting a grand gala hung over Dominic like a storm cloud, growing darker with each conversation. Alexander painted vivid pictures of influential guests, powerful alliances, the restoration of Dominic's once unshakable status. Every suggestion, every polished word pulled Dominic deeper into a familiar suffocation, one he had once mistaken for purpose. Yet, with each passing day, he found himself retreating further into doubt. On evening, after another grueling day spent fending off Alexander's insistent proposals, Dominic returned home, to a sight that momentarily stole his breath. Lilia stood in the garden, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, surrounded by a symphony of colors: roses, violets, jasmine. The air was thick with their fragrance. She knelt beside a bed of blooms, her fingers tracing delicate petals with quiet reverence, utterly lost in her world of beauty and growth. A bittersweet ache settled in Dominic's chest. He longed to share in her joy, to stand beside her without the weight of the world pressing down on him. But Alexander's expectations, society's watchful gaze, the need to prove himself, it all loomed too heavily. "Dominic," her voice, warm and steady, pulled him from his thoughts. She smiled softly, though concern flickered behind her gaze. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" He hesitated, the words tangled in his throat, his instinct to bear the burden alone warring with an unfamiliar desire to let someone in. "Alexander wants to throw this gala," he exhaled sharply, "and I don't know if I can do it." The confession felt foreign, fragile in the open air. Lilia stepped closer, her presence grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Dominic," she said gently. "Your worth isn't measured by the approval of others. It never was." Yet even as she spoke, the doubt clawed at him. Could he truly stand against Alexander? Against the world that had once revered him? And worse, could he withstand the possibility of disappointing Lilia? His voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if he feared saying the words aloud would make them real. "I just want to provide for us." His fingers curled at his sides. "I want to make you proud." Lilia met his gaze, her eyes brimming with understanding, unwavering in their quiet strength. She reached for his hand, her touch gentle yet certain. "Dominic," she murmured, "I was never ashamed of you. You don't have to prove your worth to me." A lump formed in his throat, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. For so long he had been running from his grief, from his past, from the fear of being seen as less than what the world expected of him. But as Lilia stood before him, steady and unshaken, he wondered if the only person he truly needed to prove himself to was himself. "And I want you to find your own pride, Dominique." Lilia's voice was unwavering, yet filled with quiet urgency. "Our lives shouldn't be dictated by the expectations of others. We need to forge our own path." Dominic held onto her words, letting them settle in his chest like a fragile ember. But before he could fully absorb their weight, another storm loomed on the horizon. A letter arrived. The moment he saw the insignia on the envelope, a chill ran down his spine. It was from his father, the man whose shadow had loomed over his life like an ever-present storm. He unfolded the letter with careful hands, though he already knew what awaited him. The words, laced with condescension and expectation, demanded his presence at a family gathering, an elaborate display of wealth and prestige, carefully orchestrated to reinforce the Langley name. Another opportunity for his father to remind him that despite everything, Dominic was still under his control. The pressure mounted instantly, his chest tightened, a familiar anxiety clawing its way through him like an old wound reopening. Memories of cold disapproval and cutting words echoed in his mind, twisting around his thoughts like barbed wire. He had worked so hard to carve out something different, something real, but now he felt himself being pulled back into the world he had fought to escape. Lilia noticed the shift immediately, the way his shoulders tensed, the distant look in his eyes. "Dominic, you don't have to go." She reached for him, her touch gentle yet grounding. "You've built a new life here. You owe nothing to him." Her words were a lifeline, but the weight of obligation pressed down harder. "It's not that simple, Lilia." His voice was quiet, almost resigned. "He's my father. If I refuse, it will only escalate things, and I can't risk you being caught in the crossfire." The conflict inside him was suffocating. His loyalty to his family warred with his growing desire for independence. His father's voice echoed in one ear, Lilia's in the other. And then there was Alexander. Sensing Dominic's turmoil, Alexander wasted no time in pressing his own agenda. "You've got to show them you're still a Langley, Dominic," he urged, his tone slick with persuasion. "It's about power, status, asserting your place in the world. You can't let a housekeeper's dreams distract you from who you truly are." The sting of Alexander's words cut deeper than Dominic expected. He had always known Alexander was manipulative, but this was different. It was no longer about friendship. It was about control. Dominic felt like a pawn in a game he had never wanted to play, and the realization only fueled the fire of his internal conflict. Lilia, meanwhile, was fighting a battle of her own. The more she learned about Dominic's family, the more she understood the suffocating weight of his legacy, the pressure, the scrutiny, the expectation to be something more than just a man. It was crushing him. And yet, she couldn't ignore the ache in her own heart. She had dreams of a future beyond these walls, of an education, of a life where she wasn't defined by the role she played in someone else's world. But those dreams felt increasingly at odds with reality. One evening, as they sat beneath the soft glow of the library's chandelier, she finally voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. "I can't help but feel like a burden." Her voice wavered, but she refused to let it break. "You're struggling to meet expectations, and here I am, wanting more than what this life offers." Dominic looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for the first time he realized Lilia wasn't the one holding him back. She was the only person who had ever given him permission to be free. But was he brave enough to take it? Dominic reached for her, his fingers brushing against Lilia's as desperation surged within him. "You are not a burden, Lilia." His voice was raw, edged with urgency. "You're my partner, but I need to figure out how to navigate this world without losing sight of us." She held his gaze, searching for certainty in his words, for proof that they were standing on the same ground despite the shifting world around them. The stakes had never been higher. Dominic was caught in a whirlwind of expectations. His father's disapproval, Alexander's manipulation, society's relentless scrutiny, and beneath it all, his own lingering doubts. Lilia too was locked in a battle of her own, fighting to assert her identity, to claim a future beyond the one others had quietly assigned her. Their paths had converged in an unlikely union, but now they stood on the precipice of something greater, a choice. It was in the stillness of the garden, amidst the fragrant bloom of roses and the weight of unspoken fears, that a turning point took shape. For their marriage to survive, for them to truly build something together, they had to face these challenges as one, not as individuals bound by past burdens, but as partners forging a path of their own design. Dominic's pulse quickened as he thought of the upcoming family gathering. He could no longer allow himself to be shackled by old expectations, nor could he deny the truth of what he had become alongside Lilia. With that realization, something shifted inside him. A flicker of resolve, a quiet, burning defiance. For the first time, the choice was clear. They would face the battles ahead together, not as prisoners of their pasts, but as architects of their own future. The road before them was uncertain, fraught with obstacles, but Dominic was ready. He would no longer cower beneath the weight of other people's expectations. He would fight for himself, for Lilia, for them. But just as the moment solidified in his heart, a knock shattered the fragile tranquility of their shared resolve. The sound echoed through the evening air, cutting through the golden hush of twilight. Dominic turned toward the house, a sense of unease coiling in his gut. When he opened the door, his breath caught. Celeste. A name tied to his past, a presence once synonymous with warmth and nostalgia, now an unwelcome reminder of a world he was trying to step away from. She stood at the threshold, her posture poised yet tense, her elegant features marred by a flicker of unease. "Dominic, I need to talk to you," urgency laced her voice. Her gaze flickered past him, landing on Lilia, who stood just behind, silent, watchful, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet apprehension. Dominic's chest tightened. A ripple of unease passed between them all. "What's wrong, Celeste?" he asked, bracing himself for whatever storm she had brought to his doorstep. And in that moment he knew whatever she had come to say would change everything. "It's about your father." Celeste's voice was hushed, uncertain, her eyes flickered away, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to meet Dominic's gaze. "There are rumors about the family gathering. He's planning to make an announcement, a new business venture, and it involves you. He wants you to take a leading role." The words landed like a hammer blow, reverberating through Dominic with the force of a tidal wave. His father's ambition had always been a double-edged sword, sharp, relentless, and wielded without mercy. A lifetime of expectations, disappointments, and carefully curated control unraveled in Dominic's mind at once. "I can't," he started, but Celeste cut him off. "You don't understand." Her voice tightened. "He's framing it as a way to restore the family name after everything, but it's a trap, Dominic. He'll use this to manipulate you, to pull you back into his world before you even realize what's happening." A cold dread settled over him. It wasn't just about reclaiming status, it was about control. His father wasn't asking, he was commanding, and for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt something stronger than fear: anger. A slow, simmering rage bubbled to the surface, fed by years of belittlement, of dismissed dreams, of a lifetime spent as a pawn in his father's endless pursuit of power. He clenched his fists. Not this time. Lilia stepped forward, her presence grounding him. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Dominic, you don't have to accept this. It's your life. You can choose." The weight of her words settled over him like a lifeline. Could it really be that simple? Could he just walk away? His mind swirled with doubts, fears, possibilities, but beneath the chaos, something else began to take shape. A burgeoning resolve. "What if I refuse?" His voice was quiet, almost as if he were testing the idea out loud. "What if I walk away from it all?" Celeste paled. "You realize the consequences could be severe," she warned. "Your father won't take rejection lightly, he'll retaliate." Dominic's chest tightened, the weight of his father's wrath pressing down on him like an iron vice. The threat was real, and he knew it. But for the first time, he wasn't sure he cared, because for the first time, he had something worth fighting for. His gaze flicked to Lilia, the woman who had stood by him when he had nothing to offer, the woman who saw him not as a name, not as a title, but as a man. She met his stare with quiet certainty, her unwavering support igniting something in him, something stronger than obligation, stronger than fear. "I can't keep living in fear of his approval," Dominic said, his voice gaining strength. "I've built a life here with you, Lilia, and I won't let him take that away from me." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. A line had been drawn. Celeste's eyes widened, shock flickering across her face, but then, slowly, the disbelief faded, replaced by something else: admiration. "If you stand up to him, it will change everything." She exhaled, her expression measured but firm. "But you need to be ready for a fight, Dominic. He won't let you go easily." A rush of adrenaline surged through him. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment that demanded he confront the ghosts of his past. No more running, no more hiding. For the first time in his life, Dominic was ready to fight for himself, for his future, for them. The weight of his father's expectations had loomed over him for so long that it had become an invisible shackle, one he had barely recognized until now. But as the realization settled deep within him, Dominic saw the truth with startling clarity. He could redefine what it meant to be a Langley, And for the first time, he would. With newfound determination, he made the decision that would alter the course of his life. "I won't go to the gathering," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I refuse to play the role he scripted for me. I'm going to tell him that I'm forging my own path." A flicker of something powerful passed through Lilia's gaze. Pride. She stepped closer, her presence grounding him, steadying him. "Together," she murmured, reaching for his hand, "we'll face whatever comes next. You're not alone in this." A rush of warmth spread through him at her unwavering belief in him. The emotional weight of his decision pressed into his bones, but alongside it came something else, a liberating sense of clarity. He could feel the chains of expectation breaking away, piece by piece, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to dream of a future unburdened by the shadows of his past. The thought of standing before his father, unyielding and resolute, filled him with both trepidation and exhilaration. That night, as the evening deepened, Dominic and Lilia sat together for hours, their hushed voices weaving the fragile beginnings of a new future. They envisioned a life beyond the mansion's suffocating walls, beyond the weight of societal expectations. They spoke of traveling, of building a home together, of pursuing passions untainted by obligation, a sanctuary of their own where dreams could flourish without restraint. And yet, reality lingered like an unrelenting shadow. Defying his father would mean severing ties. With that came the loss of security, of wealth, of the life he had always known. But as Dominic gazed at Lilia, he felt something profound shift inside him, a willingness to embrace the unknown, to risk everything for the sake of something real. The day of the gathering. Time passed too quickly. Each day was marked by anticipation, a quiet storm brewing beneath Dominic's resolve. The gala loomed ever closer, but rather than succumb to doubt, he prepared, not for a performance, but for a reckoning. When the day finally arrived, he stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with a strange mix of anxiety and certainty. His reflection stared back at him, a man on the verge of defiance. Laughter and chatter echoed through the halls downstairs, a symphony of voices that felt both familiar and foreign. This was his world. Or at least, it had been. With each measured breath, he solidified his resolve. He would not be controlled. And then, without hesitation, he descended the grand staircase. Each step felt like a declaration, a commitment to himself, a promise to Lilia. The moment he entered the grand hall, a hush rippled through the crowd. Eyes turned toward him, some filled with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. The room was a spectacle of wealth and influence. Gold chandeliers casting a warm glow over polished marble floors, champagne glasses glittering in the hands of people who had spent their lives chasing power. And at the center of it all stood his father. An imposing figure draped in authority, surveying the room like a king overseeing his domain. Dominic's heart pounded, but he held his head high. He would not shrink beneath the weight of expectation. His father's gaze locked onto him. "Dominic, my boy." The words were warm, inviting, a polished veneer masking something far more calculated. "I'm glad you could join us." A slow, measured smile. "There's much to discuss," Dominic exhaled, steadying himself. He knew what came next, and he was ready. His father's smile was sharp, predatory, the look of a man who believed he still had the final move in an unending game of control. "You think you can simply defy me and walk away?" His voice was low, calculated. "I don't need you, Dominic, but Lilia." A chill shot through Dominic's veins. His father wasn't coming after him, he was coming after her. Dominic stiffened, his heart pounding. "What are you saying?" His father tilted his head slightly, feigning nonchalance, but his words were razor-sharp. "Do you truly believe she'll be able to study without my money? That she'll be accepted anywhere without my influence?" His smile widened, as if savoring the moment. "I can make sure every university rejects her. No door will open for her." Dominic's stomach twisted. His father was playing his trump card, not to keep him in line, but to punish him for stepping out of it. "You can defy me, son, but Lilia will pay the price." The room was too bright, too stifling, the chandeliers above gleaming like silent spectators to his father's cruelty. A slow breath filled Dominic's lungs, though it did nothing to calm the storm rising within him. His father was waiting for fear, for submission, but Dominic wasn't afraid anymore. He lifted his chin, meeting his father's gaze head-on. The hush in the room deepened, the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides. "Actually, Father, there's something I need to say." The murmurs died instantly. Every eye turned toward him, anticipation thick in the air. "I'm not going to be part of this." His voice was steady, unwavering. "I refuse to play the role you've written for me. I am forging my own path, one that doesn't include your expectations." A ripple of gasps swept through the guests, a fracture in the perfect illusion of the Langley family. His father's expression hardened, the carefully controlled mask of parental pride slipping away to reveal pure fury. "You'll regret this, Dominic." His tone dropped, venomous. "You've been given everything, and this is how you repay me?" Dominic inhaled slowly, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. "No, Father. I won't let your ambitions dictate my life any longer. I am not your trophy son. I am my own man, and I will not let you destroy the future I am building for myself and the woman I love." The words ignited something within him, an unshackling, a severing of the invisible chains that had bound him for so long. The emotional weight of his declaration crashed over him, a tidal wave of fear, exhilaration, freedom, but more than anything, he felt alive. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic could feel the energy shift, crackling like an unseen storm. Some guests looked on with disapproval, whispers of scandal threading through the crowd, but others, a few, just enough to notice, murmured in admiration. For the first time, Dominic had taken control of his own narrative. And beside him, Lilia's presence was his anchor. She stood tall, unwavering, a reminder of why this fight mattered. Their shared dreams, their aspirations. They were worth this battle. His father's reign over him was ending. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And Dominic knew without a doubt that this choice, this defiance, would reverberate through every part of their lives, for better or worse. He had chosen his own path, and he had never felt stronger. As the confrontation unfolded, Dominic braced himself for the storm that was sure to follow. Whatever the consequences, he was ready. He had spent too long living under the weight of his father's expectations, too long suffocating beneath a legacy that was never truly his. But now, standing beside Lilia, emboldened by the unwavering partnership they had forged, he felt something he had never experienced before. Freedom together, they would navigate the uncertainties ahead, bound not by duty or obligation, but by the shared commitment to authenticity, to a future of their own making. The journey was only beginning, but for the first time, Dominic felt a purpose pulling him forward rather than chaining him down. A charged silence settled over the grand hall, thick with tension, crackling like static in the air. Dominic's pulse thundered in his ears, but he stood his ground as his father's piercing gaze bore into him. The weight of expectation, of judgment, of control pressed against his chest. This moment, this stand, was a fracture in everything his father had built, and his father knew it. "Do you truly think you can just walk away?" his father hissed, his voice razor-sharp with fury. "You're nothing without my name, without my legacy. I built this family, and I can just as easily dismantle it." The words struck like a slap, laced with the familiar sting of shame. But this time, something inside Dominic refused to break. Beneath the humiliation, beneath the fear, was something else. Something his father had never expected. A slow-burning fire that had been simmering for years, waiting for this moment to ignite. Dominic squared his shoulders, his jaw tightening as he met his father's gaze head-on. "It's not your legacy I want, Father. It's my own life." His voice was firm, unshaken. "I refuse to be a puppet in your game any longer." The air in the room shifted. A ripple of movement passed through the guests, some exchanging uncertain glances, others watching with something close to admiration. Celeste's eyes widened in shock. Lilia's hand found his, her quiet strength anchoring him in place. Dominic could feel it happening, the moment when power began to tilt away from his father. For years, Dominic had been the obedient son, the heir molded to fit the Langley name. But now, In front of them all, he was something different, something undeniable. A catalyst for change. His father's expression darkened, his lips curling in disdain. And then, the final dagger, your mother would be ashamed. The words were like a gut punch, a cruel, precise strike aimed straight at his heart. A murmur rippled through the room at the mention of her, the woman who had once been the silent force holding their fractured family together. Dominic's chest tightened. The pain of her absence, the longing, the ache of never knowing whether she would have stood by him or by his father, it all surged up like a tidal wave. Doubt crept in. For a split second, the foundation beneath him shook. But then, Lilia's fingers tightened around his, rounding him, reminding him of the truth. His mother had wanted more for him. She had been forced to navigate the treacherous waters of their family's expectations, always walking a tightrope between duty and love. He would not let her memory be weaponized against him. "Don't you dare use her against me," Dominic said, his voice low but steady, threaded with an intensity that sent a shiver through the room. "She wanted me to be happy, to find my own way. I won't let you twist her memory just to keep me under your control." The air grew heavier, the power in the room shifting like an unseen force. And for the first time in his life, Dominic saw it. A flicker in his father's eyes. Beneath the rage, beneath the perfectly constructed facade of power, was something else. Uncertainty. The first crack in a fortress that had once seemed impenetrable. And Dominic, he was the one who had put it there. Dominic pressed on, his resolve strengthening with every breath. The lessons he had learned over the past month surged forward, each one a reminder that true strength came from vulnerability, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand firm despite it. "Every time I've tried to follow your path, I've lost a piece of myself," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I can't live under your shadow any longer. I deserve to be my own man." His words rang through the grand hall, slicing through the tension like a blade. For a moment, just a moment, he felt the weight of his father's expectations lift. Then came the fury. "Foolish boy," his father's voice thundered through the room, the mask of control slipping away, revealing the raw, desperate man beneath. "You think you can just throw everything away? You'll ruin us all. Ruin yourself. You'll be left with nothing." The words should have shaken him. Once they would have, but Dominic stood tall, his heart racing not with fear, but with certainty. Because beside him, Lilia stood, unwavering. She had always believed in him, not as the heir to a name, not as a pawn in a dynasty, but as a man capable of choosing his own destiny. Together, they had imagined a future built on hope, on truth, on love. And for the first time in his life, Dominic saw that future as something real. "I'd rather have nothing," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "than live in the prison you've built. I choose my happiness over your legacy. I choose love over fear." Silence crashed over the room, thick and suffocating. Every breath, every heartbeat, every glance exchanged in the crowd carried the weight of something monumental. Dominic's father stared at him, the storm behind his eyes raging, a maelstrom of anger, disbelief, and something else. A flicker of understanding. For a fleeting second, Dominic thought he saw it. The realization that his son had become something his father never could, a man free of fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. His father's expression hardened into stone. "Get out," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "If you turn your back on this family, you're no longer a Langley, you'll be nothing." The words were meant to wound, to break him, to make him doubt. But instead, Dominic felt something else. Relief. A weight falling away. "So be it," he replied, his voice like steel. "I'll create a new identity for myself, one that is not defined by your fears or your failures." He turned without hesitation. As he did, he caught Celeste's wide-eyed disbelief, the ripple of murmurs spreading through the crowd, the silent shock etched onto the faces of those who had always known him as Dominic Langley, the dutiful son. And then, in the chaos, he saw her Lilia. The faintest glimmer of pride shone in her eyes, and in that single moment, everything made sense. This was the moment he had envisioned, the culmination of his journey toward self-acceptance. The murmur of voices swelled around him, some in outrage, some in admiration. None of it mattered. Because with every step away from his father, Dominic stepped toward freedom, toward a new life, toward a future that was truly his own. And as he and Lilia left the grand hall together, the air felt lighter, as if generations of expectations had finally begun to lift. He didn't look back, because for the first time in his life, the only path that mattered was the one ahead. Once outside, they paused on the steps, the cool night air wrapping around them like a balm after the suffocating tension inside. Dominic inhaled deeply, his senses awakening, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with liberation. He turned to Lilia, his chest swelling with gratitude, with love. "Thank you for standing by me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Lilia's lips curled into a soft, knowing smile. Her eyes shimmered, unshed tears reflecting the glow of the night sky. "You did this, Dominic," she whispered. "You found your voice, and that's the most powerful thing of all." He let her words sink in, felt them weave into his soul, and in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of stars, their light emerging against the twilight, Dominic felt something profound shift within him. He had faced his greatest trial. He had walked into battle, into the storm of his father's wrath, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, more resolute. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, with possibility, with the echoes of his choice shaping a new future, one that he controlled. The road ahead would be uncertain, unpredictable, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. With Lilia beside him, he was ready to forge a new identity, one rooted in love, authenticity, and the unwavering belief that he could create a life truly his own. As they walked hand in hand, something bloomed within Dominic's heart, hope he had chosen to break free, to unshackle himself from the chains of expectation. And in doing so, he hadn't just reclaimed his identity, he had begun to write a new narrative, one that celebrated the strength of love, the power of choice, the beauty of a future unbound by the past, a world beyond the Langley name. As Dominic and Lilia stepped away from the imposing facade of the Langley estate, the world beyond its towering gates felt impossibly vast, stretched out before them like an unwritten story. Endless, unknown, their hearts beat in unison, each footfall marking the weight of the moment they had just shared. The night air, crisp and electric, was a stark contrast to the suffocating grandeur they had left behind. And with each step forward, Dominic felt lighter, freer. The days that followed. The days after the confrontation were a whirlwind. At first there was euphoria, an intoxicating rush of freedom that surged through Dominic's veins. For the first time, he was living for himself. Each small step, choosing his own clothes instead of ones tailored to fit an image, walking through streets without the weight of his family name pressing on his shoulders, engaging in conversations where his last name wasn't his introduction, felt revolutionary. He explored new hobbies, met people who had never heard of the Langleys, and took on a part-time job that allowed him to engage with the community in ways he had never imagined possible. And with every new experience, every choice made by his own volition, Dominic proved to himself that he was capable of creating his own destiny. But freedom came at a cost. Yet, with liberation came the inevitable fallout. His father's anger did not fade. It intensified. Where once there were quiet warnings, there were now public denouncements. Where once his father's influence had been a guiding hand, it became a weapon, one wielded in whispers among the elite circles they once shared. The Langley name, once synonymous with prestige, became a cautionary tale for some. For others, it became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even within power, there was choice. Some turned away in disappointment, in disdain. But others leaned in. They saw Dominic stand not as recklessness, but as courage. They saw a man who had chosen truth over comfort, love over legacy, self-worth over status. And inspired by his defiance, they whispered among themselves, "If he can break free, what's stopping the rest of us?" Dominic did not yet know what the future held, but as he and Lilia walked forward, hands entwined, hearts steady, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was finally free. Celeste had watched the entire confrontation unfold, her heart hammering against her ribs as Dominic stood firm against his father. She had always admired his quiet strength, his ability to exist within the rigid confines of his family's expectations without letting them completely define him. But today was different. She saw him break free, and something inside her stirred. For years she had been the dutiful daughter, the perfect student, sculpted by the pressures of lineage and expectation. She had followed the carefully laid out path, never straying, never questioning. But as she watched Dominic walk away from it all, a terrifying, yet exhilarating thought took root in her mind. Could she do the same? Their friendship deepened in the days that followed, built not on shared obligation, but on the raw honesty of two people rediscovering themselves. Together they spoke of dreams once dismissed, of fears they had never dared to voice aloud. Slowly, Celeste allowed herself to question, to wonder, to believe that there was more waiting for her than the life she had been assigned. Lilia's awakening. Lilia, too, underwent her own transformation. At first she had felt like an outsider in Dominic's world, a quiet presence overshadowed by the grandeur of the Langley legacy. She had feared she would always exist on the periphery, a supporting character in someone else's story. But as Dominic embraced his independence, as he stepped into his own truth, she found her own strength blossoming alongside his. She had spent so much of her life fighting to survive, to build stability in a world that had always tried to keep her in place. But survival was not enough anymore. She wanted to live, to create, so she picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years. What had once been a distant dream, an idle love for art, for design, for the beauty of creative expression, now became a passion she could no longer ignore. Together, she and Dominic attended exhibitions and workshops, their hands brushing as they admired the vibrant strokes of color and texture. They built a new kind of intimacy, one woven from inspiration and the joy of discovering the world together. She was no longer just the woman who had stood beside him. She was her own force of nature. Dominic's reflection. In the quiet moments after the chaos, Dominic reflected. The confrontation with his father had changed him, but it had not been the defining moment of his life. That moment was happening now. Because walking away from his father wasn't just about breaking free, it was about stepping into the love and support that had been around him all along. His past was not something to reject, it was something to understand. He was a Langley by blood, but he was also a man of his own making. He no longer sought to erase where he came from, he simply refused to let it define him. A new beginning. As weeks turned into months, Dominic forged a new identity, not through wealth or status, but through the connections he made and the purpose he found. He sought out others who had felt voiceless, who had battled against the weight of expectation. He listened to their stories, shared his own, and in doing so healed a part of himself he hadn't realized was still wounded. Through community outreach, he found a sense of belonging he had never known before. His story became a beacon of hope, not just for himself, but for those who were still searching for the courage to break free, and the ripples of his choice stretched far beyond himself. Celeste, once the quiet, obedient daughter, finally pursued her own dreams, enrolling in environmental science with the intent to make a tangible difference in the world. Even his father, though still entrenched in bitterness and resentment, was forced to face the uncomfortable truth of his actions. Their relationship was fractured, perhaps beyond repair. But Dominic no longer needed his father's approval, and that, more than anything, set him free. A moment of peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in a breathtaking palette of gold and crimson, Dominic and Lilia sat on a park bench, hands intertwined. The weight of the past no longer pressed against them. Instead, it lingered like a whisper, a reminder of how far they had come. Dominic exhaled, his gaze drifting upward, lost in the vastness of the sky. "I never imagined I could feel this way," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so long trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. But now, I feel alive. I feel like I'm finally me." Lilia turned to him, her expression soft, knowing. "And you're not alone, Dominic." She squeezed his hand, her warmth grounding him. "You've created a space for us both to be who we truly are. We're writing our own story, one filled with love, with freedom, with the courage to choose ourselves every single day." Dominic smiled, the words settling into his bones. For the first time in his life, The future was his to create. And he couldn't wait to see where it led. Dominic took a deep breath, letting the night air fill his lungs as he absorbed the beauty of the moment. A sense of profound gratitude settled over him, not just for the choices he had made, but for the man he had become. The journey had been tumultuous, fraught with pain and conflict, yet through it all, he had found something he had never truly known before. Freedom, not just freedom from his father's expectations, but the freedom to exist as himself, unshackled by the burdens of the past. He had discovered belonging, not within the cold, rigid halls of his family's estate, but in the community he had built, a tapestry woven with the threads of friendship, love, and shared experiences. As he and Lilia gazed at the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, Dominic felt his heart brim with hope. He was no longer just the son of a Langley, he was Dominic, nothing more and nothing less. And that was enough, a legacy of his own. In the months that followed, Dominic and Lilia nurtured their relationship, each encouraging the other to chase their dreams without hesitation. They traveled, explored new cultures, and forged connections with people from all walks of life, people who had no idea of the name Dominic Langley or the legacy he had walked away from. Their love deepened, rooted in something far greater than status or obligation. It was built on understanding, on choice, on the unshakable truth that they had both chosen this life together. Dominic's journey had become a testament to the idea that love and courage could transcend even the deepest familial divides. And as he stood on the brink of a new chapter, he realized something. His story wasn't just his own, it was one that needed to be shared, a story that could inspire others to break free, to embrace their own truths, to create lives unbound by expectation, a celebration of truth. So one evening, Dominic decided to host a gathering, a celebration of authenticity, love, and the power of self-discovery. He invited friends, family, and even those from the community who had inspired him along the way. His home, a space he had once seen as a symbol of confinement, was transformed into a sanctuary of acceptance. The atmosphere hummed with laughter, with stories unfolding, with connections forming between people who, in another life, might never have crossed paths. And as Dominic moved through the crowd, taking in the warmth, the joy, the undeniable sense of belonging, he realized something profound. He had not only reclaimed his identity, he had created something greater, a community that thrived on love, on understanding, on the belief that we are all meant to write our own stories. The past, with all its pain, had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. A toast to the future. As the night deepened, as laughter spilled into the air like a melody, Dominic raised his glass, his voice carrying over the crowd. To love, to courage, and to the beautiful journey of finding ourselves, he declared, his eyes shining with emotion. May we continue to inspire one another. Always. A chorus of cheers erupted, glasses clinking together in a resounding affirmation of hope and resilience. In that moment, Dominic knew. He had become the man he was always meant to be, a man unbound, unafraid, and ready to embrace the endless possibilities that lay ahead. As the stars twinkled above, so too did the promise of a future filled with love, authenticity, and joy. A future that was finally, undeniably, his own. Dominic's journey of self-discovery and courage didn't just transform his life, it created ripples, touching the lives of those around him. His story is a testament to the power of choosing authenticity over expectation, love over fear, and self-worth over legacy. Share your reflections in the comments below. Let's connect through our shared experiences. If this message touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today.